in, I'm going to go ahead and invite Damon up to read something, one of Tim's favorite readings for the book. Damon?
You family, my name's Damon. I'm an alcoholic and member of Al-Anon. This is from One Day at a Time in Al-Anon from August 18th. Storing up grievances is more than a waste of time. It's a waste of life that could be lived to a greater satisfaction. If I keep a record of oppressions and indignities, I am restoring them to painful reality. I found they're surprisingly easy to forget once I start using the Al-Anon program every day. And it ends with a passage from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. The horror of that moment, the king said, I shall never forget. You will, though, said the queen, if you don't make a memorandum of it.
Thank you, Damon. All right, that's wonderful. Thank you. And now I'm going to invite Bill up to introduce Tim for us. Bill?
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Donaldson, and I am an alcoholic. And, my job right now is to introduce our next speaker. And for those of you who don't know Tim, you are in for a great surprise. Everyone that I know who has met Tim leaves a better person. They think, wow, that guy is really something. And not only does he technically know the brainiac stuff, he's kind and loving and attentive. Tim?
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon, and I'm also an alcoholic. And I'm a number of other things that I'm not going to mention in mixed company, but I qualify in lots of different places. So the official title of this little talk is Staying Away from the First Think. I was in a meeting many years ago when someone was reading from the 12 and 12, and they talked about an obsession with destructive drinking, except they misread it and they talked about an obsession with destructive thinking, and no one noticed that they'd made this mistake because it made complete sense. If you were reading in the book, you would have realized it said drinking, but it made complete sense. Sister BM says, my head would kill me if it didn't need me for transportation. I think the tragic truth is that my head will kill me even though it needs me for transportation. And when I'm drinking, I'm not drinking at the moment. I haven't had a drink since the 24th of July, 1993, so I'm not drinking today, not even beer. A lot of other things I'm not doing as well. But the problem really starts once I'm sober. My Al-Anonism is an abeyance while I'm drinking. As soon as I'm sober, I flip over to the other side, and my problem starts to become my Al-Anonism. Just a little bit about why my mind is my problem when I'm in a drinking phase. A drink always seems to me to be a good idea. Sometimes people say AA has removed the desire to drink, or has removed all thoughts of drinking, or God has removed the desire to drink. God has removed all thoughts of drinking. I will occasionally have thoughts of drinking. Now, they're not impulses. They don't overpower me, but the thought flitters across my mind like a little butterfly. Wouldn't it be nice? Oh, I could do with something to take the edge off, right? Because I'm not in the habit of doing what my mind tells me, I'm okay. But I'm only in the habit of not doing what my mind tells me because I've been trained militarily in AA and in Al-Anon. And there's a group in Plymouth in London, Plymouth in the UK, It's a very tough group. And they talk about the AA program like military training, so that when soldiers are under fire, they are in the habit of following commands, even though the command might look insane or they don't understand why the command is being given. They just do it because they're in the habit of doing it. They're drilled into them. And when I'm nuts, and I can be nuts because I'm NUTS, not using the steps, I can be using the steps and still be nuts. There are moments when whatever step it is hasn't quite kicked in yet. I can be under the onslaught of my own thinking at any time. But the training kicks in. I go to a meeting, I pray, I call someone. It's not rocket science. And someone in here actually is a rocket scientist and can attest to the fact it's literally not rocket science. It's something else. But the alcoholism is straightforward. Sorry to the alcoholics who think it's very complicated. I don't think it is. It's very straightforward. A bit of me wants to drink, and if you put drink inside me, all bets are off. My Al-Anonism, to me, is more complicated and more interesting because it comes in so many different forms. Most of which, by the way, if you want to learn about Al-Anonism, you can do one of two things, and this is not an Al-Anon approved statement, so you can take it for what it is. You can either go to Al-Anon or you can listen to a lot of Sondheim, because there are so many Sondheim lyrics which basically are untreated. Oliver is another musical where Nancy with her terrible boyfriend, and she stays with him because he needs me so, runs the song. There's a song, I think, from Follies. The sun comes up, I think about you. The coffee cup, I think about you. Well, if that's not Al-Anonism, I don't know what is. And I can find so many reasons to think about you. I can think that you're not doing it right, you need to do it differently. The whole country is doing it wrong. You see, my Al-Anonism started with being affected by other alcoholics. And then you see, as I got older, the table started to turn, and part of me wanted revenge on all of the alcoholics from my childhood by taking control of the ones I had in front of me now, because that would show them. And that attitude of they need to change for me to be okay, I apply to the whole world. I will put on the radio, I will put on the television, and I know exactly what everyone needs to do in order for me to live in a placid, peaceful world. My Al-Anonism points in all directions, but this preoccupation with other people, particularly with charming alcoholics. Now, I find alcoholics charming. You need to know this. Non-alcoholics and non-Al-Anons don't find alcoholics charming. We think we're charming. We even write in the literature how we think we're of above average intelligence or above average earning capacity. I'll give you an example of what alcoholics look like to non-alcoholics. My other half is not an alcoholic and has come out for dinner with bunches of people after meetings on many occasions. And I said, what is it like being out for dinner with a bunch of alcoholics? We think we're the life and soul of the party. We think we're a whole load of fun. What my other half says, he says it's like being in an empty field, and in the field there are these wells, and down the bottom of each well is one solitary frog gribbeting to itself. We think we're connecting and communicating. We're just on broadcast only. Broadcast mode. There's nothing getting in. It's all going out. It's very interesting what other people say about us in social situations. So anyway, back to the point. What's the point? So I've lost my track already. My mind, that was the problem. My mind is the problem. Obsession with other people. And it started off with obsession with the people who are angry with me and how I can make them like me. Obsession with the people that are going to rescue me. And I would look for angry people to rescue me. That's one of the insanities. Placid people, to me, didn't have the energy which would fix me. There's something about the energy of people with profound rage which makes them attractive to someone like me. It's the energy that I will feed off, and I become preoccupied. In AA, I get preoccupied with, is my sponsee doing their step work? How are they doing? Are they going to drink? Being hyper vigilant in meetings. I remember being in an intergroup meeting many years ago, and I was new to the intergroup, and there was a problem with it's always the treasurer, isn't it? There was a problem with the treasurer, and the treasurer was doing things by the book, and everyone else was furious with the treasurer. And I sat there in that room, figuring out who was angry with who and who presented a danger. There was no danger to me, but I grew up hyper vigilant of angry people. And I remember in that meeting, sitting there, realizing that I was holding my breath because something sensed danger. And someone explained it to me once: if a deer is in the woods and it senses danger, it stops, and it stops breathing, and it just stays as still as possible, because if it steps on a twig, something will hear that it's there and come and snack on it. And that was my position. Frightened of angry people because they're going to destroy me. So I have to control them back and turn them into pleasant homemakers. That's the problem. Part of the problem. The other part of the problem is living in constant anxiety and thinking only about what's going to happen to me. It started as a child thinking about nuclear war. I was completely obsessed with nuclear war and working out where the safest place to live in the United Kingdom would be, sitting there with a pair of compasses, drawing circles round potential attack sites, working out where the blast zones were and exactly how bad would the burns be at 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles, where should we live, and suggesting to my parents, Shrewsbury, we want to live in Shrewsbury, it is the only safe place. I was like 7, 8, in charge because I was frightened. And these fears continued. I mean, I was trained to be frightened. Sometimes people say I was affected by the energy in the home that I grew up in, or the subtexts, or the unconscious messaging, the telegraphing. No, it was completely overt in the house that I grew up in. I came first in something, I can't remember what it was, some trivial thing. And my mother, who is French, she said, if you have come first once, it means you can do it every time. And if you don't, it is because you are lazy. So this was an overt message. You better perform. My brother committed suicide when I was 10, 11, somewhere in there. And relatives queued up to literally say, if you do well at school, it will take your mother's pain away. This was not a subliminal message. It was overt and clear what the system was. So I was frightened the whole time. And for years into recovery, I would wake up with terror and panic attacks. And I didn't have an easy ride for the first few years. I was sober, but that was kind of it. Now I want to get really practical with this, because I had a little flashback to a moment when I was in AA for a few weeks, and or sober a few weeks. I've been in AA a few months, but I was sober a few weeks, and I bought the deal. I was happy to be here. I was happy to be sober. I didn't dislike the people around me too intensely. That was as good as that was going to get. I was okay. This is fine. And the steps are going to work, but what do I actually do? And people would just repeat and parrot, do the steps, get a sponsor, do the steps, do service, get a sponsor, do the steps. I said, but what about today? The steps, I'm not going to do all of the steps today. I'm insane. Today, do you have anything today? Give me something concrete I can literally work with to stop me being suicidal the whole time. If I'm suicidal just half the time, that will be a massive improvement. Do you have anything? Get a sponsor, do the steps, maybe ask your sponsor, and then you ask the sponsor and the sponsor says, oh, just do the steps. And it drove me crazy until I found a couple of people that gave me some really practical things I could actually do to change how I felt today. In New York, one of the sayings, the little slogans is, we wish you a long, slow recovery, which is, I kind of know what they mean. In other words, don't assume you're going to get super well by next Thursday and then be surprised when you're not. But I needed instant solutions. I needed things which were going to work today. I remember when I was a year and a half sober, I was looking to expand my spiritual life. I mean, to expand one, you've got to have one. I didn't really have one, and that was the real problem. But you get the point. I was reading this book, I was reading that book, and I picked up it's a wonderful book, and I still dip into it occasionally on a particular type of Buddhism. And the author said, if you sit doing this particular type of meditation for 20, 30 years, then enlightenment will start to happen. And I thought, I don't have that kind of time. I'm not going to make it sitting in this position for 20 or 30 years for an hour or two a day. I mean, I can do it, but the clock's ticking here. I've got 12 things I've written down, 12 practical things to do. Now, one of them is do the steps. I'm sorry about that. One does have to do that. But I'm going to explain why I think doing the steps makes a difference because the topic is my head and how I deal with my head. And my head's pretty good today. It's not bad at all. I'm quite pleased with its progress. It's not my progress, it's its progress. So the first thing, Tom W. talks about having to clean up your mess first. Until your mess is cleaned up, nothing else is going to get done. You want to get into the heavenly banquet, but if you have unfinished business with other people, you can't come in. God's not being mean, God's not being cruel. It's just house rules. So just deal with the past. And there are a couple of things that I needed to do to deal with the past. The first one is very simply put as forgive everyone for everything. That's all. But here's the thing. If I really know how to forgive one person for one thing, I've now learned the lesson. It's not like there's a completely different process with each one. And what I went through with forgiveness, and I've discovered actually it can be a lot quicker than you think it is if you unlock the keys, unlock the lock in the right order. You know those safes where you have to twist the dial one way to a certain number and twist the dial the other way. If you get the combination right, the safe opens. And that's my experience with forgiveness. And the combination is this. Behind every resentment is the delusion that if people behave differently, I'd be okay. And the fact is, it's a delusion straight out of page 61. And some really good examples. If I look back at the times I got my own way, I was talking to someone the other day about that when they finished their bachelor's degree many years ago. I said, how long were you working towards that? And it was 16, 17 years from when you first go to school to when you finish your bachelor's degree. 16 years towards this single point. And how long were you happy having got the degree? And we agreed it was about 10 minutes. You've been working for 16 years for 10 minutes. I don't know if you have them here. There's a sweet, which is a sort of boiled sweet on a stick. in the UK called a gobstopper. Do you have them here? Anyway, these huge boiled sweets, they last longer than the happiness. You could just give the 5-year-old the gobstopper. It would be happier for longer than someone that studies for 16 years to get a bachelor's degree. And every single resentment is based on the delusion, if they behave differently, I would be okay. The truth is, for every resentment, there are 99 things in my life which are going just fine. If things going my way were going to make me happy, I'd be happy. So I'm resenting someone based on a delusion. Secondly, the moralization behind resentment. Resentment is observing something is not as I wish it would be, and they are bad, and I am good, and I am right. And that's the problem. You can observe anything neutrally. The thing, let's say someone is genuinely doing something legitimately wrong, and everyone agrees that they're doing something wrong. It's still not reason to get your knickers in a twist about it. It can be observed neutrally. This moralization, you see, this is where I see the real reason why I resent, is because there's an English historian that talks about the British, and he says that the reason why the British sit on the fence is because they enjoy the sensation. And the reason that we can say it about us, you can't say it about us. Okay. But why do I resent? Because I enjoy the sensation until I realize I really don't, that I would rather have peace, that peace is actually a whole lot more fun than resenting people. So, but the moralization is I'm in no position to moralize about anyone else. In particular, whatever I'm spotting in you is very likely to be a distorted form of what I don't want to admit in myself. I can't get rid of it out of my consciousness, so I see it in another form in you. So I've got to drop the demands because they're nonsense. I've got to drop the moralization because I'm in no position to moralize. And then what I do is the third point to getting rid of resentment is looking at the situation from the other person's point of view and asking God to see the world through someone else's eyes within seconds brings me insights at the beginnings of compassion, maybe not the end of compassion, but the beginnings of compassion, and then actively, mentally, or with my spirit, my soul, extending love towards people. If you can invoke imagination to figure out where to get the next drink or drug, you can invoke imagination to figure out how to extend love towards people. Just use a little bit of nous and it's possible. The other thing which is very important about resentment is basically a form of me mentally attacking other people, Except where is the attack taking place? It's taking place inside my own mind. So whenever I resent, the person I'm attacking is me. If I'm to be at peace, I must stop resenting. I'm the victim of my own resentment. It doesn't hurt anyone else, at least not directly. So step 4, I've so often asked people, so people call up, they say, I've got a resentment. I said, what are you doing about it? Well, I've written my columns. And well, that's very good. But that provides you with the base material to do something about resentment. But it doesn't get rid of it. It might give you a moment's relief, but it doesn't pull the roots of the resentment out. So one's got to do all the stuff on the bottom of page 66, top of page 67 to get any real results. Tiny thing about fear. If I believe I'm essentially a physical being, I'm going to be frightened. If I recognize I'm consciousness, I happen to be transported around in this physical form, that consciousness can't be hurt. I can't be hurt. My circumstances can't be hurt. Notice in the third column, a friend of mine pointed this out a few years ago. Actually, they're now an acquaintance, but that's another story. He was a friend at the time. What he pointed out was, it doesn't say with resentment, this affects me. It's this affects my personal relations, sex relations, ambition, security, pocketbooks, pride, and self-esteem. If I'm detached from those things, in the same way that if you have kitchen utensils, if someone does something to your kitchen utensils, they haven't done something to you, they've done something to your pan. If you recognize that you are not your pan, you're fine. If you're identified with the pan, you'll be upset. A friend of mine actually she made amends to this poor girl, this poor flatmate, for pouring vinegar on the girl's sofa. And the girl, in receiving the amends, said, "I can't believe you did that to me." Now, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. But then I looked at the language. "I can't believe you did that to me." No, she did it to the sofa. You're mixing yourself up with the sofa. When I am mentally attached to all of the facts and circumstances and physical things of my life, it is impossible not to be frightened because those things are vulnerable. There's no such thing as security in the material world. So the fear inventory, what is self? Self is all of my attachments to anything other than being a child of God. If I'm relying on those for my identity, my value, my purpose, I must be frightened. If I get my identity, my value, my purpose from being a child of God, I cannot be frightened. And so really looking at what the book actually says and believing it, when it says on page 28, we're all children of a living creator, you think, well, that's very nice. Yeah, but do you believe it? If you really believe, if you make the decision to believe it, when I made the decision to believe that, everything changed. I thought, let's pretend that is true. And so if I'm a child of God, God is not material, I'm not material. I happen to be running around in a physical body. That's it. The other thing about step 9, sometimes you say to people, have you finished? They're in a terrible state. They call up, they say, I'm in a terrible state. Will you help me? And you say, have you done the steps? They say, I've done the steps many times. You say, okay, have you ever completed amends? And they say, yes. And you say, how many amends did you make? And they say, both of them. And you suspect there's something else going on there. I've borrowed more things and not returned them in my life than some people have on their entire step 8 and 9 lists. If I really look at every way in which I've negatively affected other people, the list is long, and really getting free, I had to scour. Step 4, it talks about an index of our grosser handicaps. Step 9 is where it says be painstaking. So step 9, where I'm looking at everything, even the tiny little things, look along your bookshelves and look at the books that actually belong to other people and send them back. And it's amazing how many little relationships are rekindled from that. That's a tiny example. What about all the people I lived with or was exposed to, or who were exposed to me during my drinking? What have I done to make amends to them for the mere fact that there was a hot mess living in close proximity to them? What have I done to actually address this with people? Now, there's a materiality threshold. One mustn't be grandiose about this. But to clear one's own conscience, absolutely. It's not just the big ticket ones. And so for my mind to quieten down, the prerequisite to start the business of quietening my mind down was completing the first 9 steps fully, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and getting to a point saying, there is nothing I'm consciously holding against anyone else. There is nothing I've done in my life, no harm that I've done that I haven't done my utmost to make amends for. There are people you can't find, that's fine. They stay on the list once a year. You pay detective agencies or other, there are people you can pay to find people, and I've done that and it's worked. So come back to that once a year, but getting to a point where there's no unfinished business, that's when I was free for the first time. And I wasn't free for the first time till I was 15 years sober, because I'd never been thorough. And the difference between doing 98% of that and doing 100% of that is like night and day. Because that 2% is where the devil is hiding, where the ego says that 2% that's left that hasn't been dealt with, that's proof that you are worthless, you're separate from God, you're separate from other people, you'll never connect, you'll never make it in the world, you're doomed to die. You deal with that 2%, the whole thing changes. It's like a journey to a city. If you miss out any part of it, you won't be in the city. If you're trying to open a safe, one of those safes with a dial, if you miss one of the numbers, the safe is entirely shut. Doesn't matter that you've got most of the numbers right. And it's a terrible spiritual law, this, that if there's anything left undone in terms of my relationship with other people, it doesn't have to be done well. That's the extraordinary thing. I wouldn't give you tuppence for how I did most of my amends. They were not graceful, they were not elegant, they weren't necessarily particularly well received, but I did them, and I did the best I could at the time. And there's a chap called Bill C who talks about the last 3 steps are not the maintenance steps. The first 9 steps raise your life to the ground, and then you start to rebuild in 10, 11, and 12. So completing the first 9 steps once takes you to the starting blocks of the journey. It's not the end of the journey. It fits you to even start, and that can manage the expectations a little if you're still within the first 9 steps and still have any unfinished business. I'd be surprised if you were at peace. I mean, there'll be moments, fine, and maybe little patches. But I don't think my recovery really fully began until I completed the conditions. And good old Dr. Bob managed it in his first day of sobriety, still hungover from the night before. So he was a bit quicker than I was. The other points, this is where, for me, it gets very practical and very interesting. Step 11 in the morning. First thing I do, God, please direct my thinking. Divorce my thinking from self-pity, self-seeking, and dishonest motives. Sometimes it feels, when I say divorce my thinking from self-pity, it's like my left arm has been chopped off. And then divorce my thinking from self-seeking, it's my right arm's been chopped off. Is there anything else to even think about? It feels like my toys are being taken away by saying this, but I recognize the wisdom and utility of having those things taken away. It's like scissors being taken and put on the top shelf out of the reach of a child. I trust that if I remain inside the little hula hoop of what does God want me to do today? Where does God want me to go today? What does God want me to say and to whom? 4 questions: what to do, where to go, what to say, to whom. That covers everything. And I just need to do my little job and make sure I keep not just my interference out of other people's lives, but the hula hoop mentally, just stay very quiet inside that hoop of the next right thing, the next right thing, the next right thing. And I thought for years I had to be like St. George and the dragon, or St. George and the many, many dragons, individually defeating each of these dragons in my mind. No, I just need to stay out of their way, because they can't be defeated in my experience. The Greek myth is very interesting because it looks crazy until you think, well, what could that mean psychologically? So there's this creature called the Hydra, which has got many heads. If you chop off one of the heads, 2 grow back. And trying to fight the dragons in my mind look like that. You fight one and it's had little baby dragons, and now you're covered in dragons everywhere. A friend of mine says, if you try to fight the devil on the devil's territory, the devil always wins. Another image that someone gave me once, trying to fight the demons in your mind, it's like trying to play chess with a pigeon. It doesn't know any of the rules. It struts all over the board, knocking over pieces and acting like it won. So even if you technically defeat your ego, it's still nattering at you and you're still in hell. So beating it with argument does not work. you don't get the desert to bloom, you leave the desert. And the safe place is that little circle in with the higher power. And it's the morning practice. A chap in London called Brendan says you want to get a preemptive strike against the devil. And that's exactly what those instructions at the bottom of 86 do. During the course of the day, I only accept being at peace. Now, that's all relative, so one never gets to perfect peace. But just quietly motoring along, it's just like when you're driving. Yeah, you can hear the sound of the road. There's a little bit of turbulence, there's a little bit of bumpiness on any road, and you can feel the road. It's not complete silence, not floating above the road, but you're motoring in a gentle way, getting through the day. And that's my ideal. And what I do in step 10 during the day is watch for when I veer off the side into something else. And the danger is dwelling on whatever the problem is. I want to get very, very quickly to what is the problem? What is the corrective measure? If I can't find it within 2 minutes, I call someone and say, right, what is my corrective measure? And boom, back in the day. I mustn't get sidetracked into those things. The fourth tool is step 12. There's nothing, it says so in the book, nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as work with other alcoholics, in Al-Anon with other Al-Anons. And by the way, the alcoholics, if you think alcoholics are self-obsessed, woof, you should join Al-Anon. You got nothing on us. Because we managed to be obsessed with you in a way that makes it all about us. I mean, it's just we're obsessed. At least alcoholics occasionally have hobbies. I mean, you are our hobby. This is the step 12, find someone who is more self-obsessed than you are and try and help. There are times when nothing works but helping someone else. And it can be something super practical. I'm not a people person. You know, they say two's company, three's a crowd. Well, for me, one's company, two's a crowd. And I'm not good in social situations, particularly. I can do them. I do actually enjoy them these days, but I'm not a natural. When there are family things, I've learned just find practical things to do and everyone's pleased. At work, to be to go above and beyond just for the sake of it, not because I'm getting something back. Just do it properly. Doesn't matter how small the job is. Just do it properly. Pretend your life depends on it. And I don't defeat the demons by defeating the demons. I defeat the demons by going and doing something else and getting absorbed in that. And then when you come back a few hours later from being absorbed in something absorbing, you think, what was the problem? I'm sure you were all peaceful and placid in your 20s, but in my 20s, I was lurching from one crisis to another. I can barely remember what the crises were. But at the time, they seemed very real and very important. And I took up huge amounts of time in meeting, telling people in extraordinary detail about my crises. Yet there's nothing left. It's like tornadoes. They cause a lot of destruction. But what are they? Air moving very quickly. That's all. And that's all that was going on in my 20s. Just my mind moving very, very quickly, destroying things. But there was nothing there. There was no basis for anything. Step 12, immensely helpful. Step 11 in the evening. I know it says when we retire at night, or words to that effect. I read something fairly recently about the writing of the big book, and I could barely get through it, but I just about got through it. I have no attention span, so long books are difficult for me. But it said in there that this nightly review actually started off as a morning review. That's why the night comes first and the morning comes second. It all looks backwards to us. Why do but makes sense now. That's where it started. You start at the beginning of the day with the review, and then you go into planning for the day. I don't much care when I do a review, as long as I do it. And I tend to do it when I retreat from the day. And that's when my obligations are finished. And like at elementary school, when you put the chairs on the desk and you go home, that's when I don't wait till my eyelids are dropping. And I want to have a nice evening. I want to clear the day, clear my mind of all the clutter of the day. Very useful tool. The sixth one is prayer. And a friend of mine said recently about prayer, you don't need to keep repeating yourself. God heard you the first time. You don't need to, you know, the way with people, you need to repeat stuff before they hear it. Although I'm told in Al-Anon, if you have to say it more than twice, you're nagging. But anyway, you get the point. But with God, God does not need to be nagged. I can say it once and get on with it. But there's one little trick that I've found enormously useful, is to learn prayers off by heart as things to contemplate and concentrate on in the place of thinking about you or them or me. And so one that I learned a long time ago, I had a period of, I couldn't get rid of the anxiety. So I learned Psalm 91 off by heart. And whenever anxiety started to arise, I didn't argue with it. I didn't try and do anything with it. I said to myself, I'm not having this. Right, Psalm 91, boom, I would start to recite it in my mind. Sometimes reciting prayers out loud is super helpful. A lot of people talk about this, how the word is very powerful. Putting the word out there, hearing my body doing something physical with the words and having the sound come back to me, much more powerful than reading something silently. So saying Psalm 91 or whatever takes your fancy. I mean, frankly, if you learnt the lyrics to a Suzanne Vega song and just sang that to yourself for a day, it's probably more useful than thinking about yourself. Anything but thinking about yourself. But I would find that those ideas became so embedded, the idea of God being like these sort of protective wings, or the angels lifting you up so you don't hurt your foot against a stone. Those images, if you repeat it enough, become part of the architecture of one's mind. And then in moments of crisis, those images come back as protective talismans. But the amazing thing was, it became so automatic, and I've got other prayers which have become automatic, that as soon as anxiety or worry or obsession or whatever started to arise within me, the prayer would start automatically and it would push it back down. So rather than having the enemy in your living room and having to expel them from your home, it's like as soon as you hear them in the distance, the wall of prayer starts and then it's gone again. And the other thing as well, I would find that waking up in the middle of the night, I wake up a lot at night, and it doesn't bother me. It's just, I just accept it as a fact. And I'm awake at night a lot. I've trained myself over the years through this prayer such that those prayers start automatically, so that I don't think about rubbish at night anymore when I can't sleep. I just have the prayers going over. It's like having your own little radio station. But you only get there by training your mind to do it. If you train it enough, it's like a machine. It knows what to do. The seventh thing, Anne Lamott says, most things work pretty well if you turn them off and then turn them on again. But leave a little gap first. Just, you know, when you're on the phone to the IT hotline, they say, make sure the power drains completely out of it and then switch it on again and it's fine. And I'm like that. There are times when nothing can be done. My head is so on another planet. I'm so obsessed and fraught and frantic and fragile and fractured. Just have a nap. And there are days when I have 4 naps and it's allowed. You're literally allowed to have 4 naps in one day. If you need it, if you want it, it's fine. You don't need to feel guilty about it. For those of you who feel guilty about napping because lazy people nap. So I nap a lot, but this idea of switching off, not just switching off me, but switching off all the devices, switching off all the notifications. There are times I can't even. So the phone goes off and it can't ring. And I think I've got a couple of hours reprieve. And it's delightful. Noise cancelling headphones, best investment in my life after the big book. The 8th thing is, now this is going to sound slightly sinister, mind control. Now, the Al-Anons at this point will prick up their ears and say, we can control their mind. No, controlling one's own mind. And there's a story that someone told me which illustrates this very well. Bloke goes to his rabbi and says, I'm troubled by intrusive thoughts. What do I do? And the rabbi says to him, well, there's another rabbi 150 miles away. He's just got the perfect answer for this problem of intrusive thoughts. Go and see him next Friday. So he travels, goes 150 miles, turns up at the rabbi's house. It's Friday evening. Everyone is preparing for the Sabbath. He knocks on the door. He can see all the bustling inside, all the people. He's completely ignored. They won't answer the door. He knocks and knocks and knocks, nothing. So he's very disappointed. He goes to the synagogue. He sleeps in the synagogue overnight. The next morning, the rabbi shows up, does the Saturday morning service. And afterwards, they are talking. And the rabbi is completely charming. So what? And he says to the rabbi, what's going on here? I was knocking on your door last night and you didn't answer. Today, you're pleasant. You've invited me for lunch. What's going on here? Oh, and by the way, you know perfectly well, I was sent to you to discuss this question of intrusive thoughts and how you deal with intrusive thoughts. So when are we going to get to that? And the rabbi said, oh, I've already given you the lesson. You see, just because someone knocks at the door doesn't mean you need to answer it. And I'm not in charge of what thoughts knock on the door of my mind. I'm in charge of whether or not I answer the knock. So staying away from the first thought means not answering the door and then going and doing something else. And sometimes it knocks and it knocks and it knocks and it knocks and it knocks. And you're like, is it ever going to stop knocking? Eventually it stops knocking. It gets bored. And with this particular practice of saying, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not, yeah, it requires a bit of fortitude and grit, but it's the most worthwhile practice I've learned to bring myself gently and persistently back to the task at hand. Every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. And that's how I bring myself back. What is in front of me to do? And concentrate on that instead. And then the knocking eventually stops. Letting go. I don't know if you've ever phoned someone up and you say to them, you tell them all your problems and they say, oh, just let go. And then you say, well, how do you do that? And they say, hang on in there, let go by hanging on in there. Yeah, can you give me something concrete here? Those are metaphors for letting go. What does letting go actually mean? And there are a couple of things here. Dr. Paul O talks about this. It's brilliant. So he would phone his sponsor complaining about his wife, and the sponsor would say, try not thinking about the problem for a couple of days and then see where you are. And he'd say, not think about it for a couple of days, but then I'll forget all about it. Which is the point of that Lewis Carroll reading. Yes, you will get over it if you don't dwell on it the whole time. So to let go of something literally means to stop thinking about it. There's nothing more mystical than that. Stop it. And you learn how to stop it by practicing. If you've spent years with an untrained mind, my mind was not trained when I was growing up and for many years afterwards. In fact, I could say I didn't grow up. That was the problem. Maybe growing up is learning to train your own mind so that it's your servant, not your master. But there are a couple of practical things on letting go, which are very, very helpful. And you'll have to adjust this imagery to suit your temperament. The imagery that I use may be more appealing to the women in the room than the men. I imagine the problem or the person, the alcoholic usually, to be encapsulated in this kind of pink bubble and floating up to the sky, and with God receiving it, saying, I'll take it from here. And then the person appears and I encapsulate them in another pink bubble, and up they go again. And I keep doing that until they stop appearing. And I imagine, and then I look around, is there anything else I need to not be thinking about? And so I consciously visualize this letting go. In the supermarkets in London in the 1960s, above the tills, they had these vacuum tubes, and they would pack a little wad of notes wound up with a rubber band. They put it in this little pod and they'd hold it in the entrance of the vacuum tube. Up it would go, gone, never see it again. And I use that imagery as well. I imagine this vacuum tube next to me. All I have to do is hold the problem just below the vacuum tube and it'll be sucked up out of my consciousness. I think imagination is very helpful with the steps. It talks a lot about this in the step 11 in the 12 and 12, about the constructive use of imagination. And that's a lot of my solution. 3 more little things. Hanging out with God. Now, again, this is an imagination and a visualization thing, which I've used for years now. When I'm going to sleep, when I'm starting to go to sleep or even just napping, I say to my higher power, show me where I'm going. And images started to come of gardens, and then there was this castle, and then there were other things. And this little world where I can hang out with my higher power, go for walks, and it comes in different forms. Sometimes it feels like it's a person, sometimes it's just a presence, sometimes there are lots of forms there. I let the higher power design that world for me, and I go there. And the amazing thing is, if I'm troubled, I can go there at will now because I've been practicing it for years. So if I feel unsafe or in an environment that I find disagreeable, I've got somewhere else to go. And that place is more real to me than anything material. And people I've lost, I can meet there. People who are back in their addiction, when they're back in their addiction, you're dealing with a version of them, a performance of them. But there's the real person who is intact inside the alcoholic who's now relapsed. And I talk to that person, the real person behind the relapsed version. I meet people, I meet the real people there, and we have a laugh about what's going on. But again, it didn't happen overnight. I developed this by practicing it and asking the higher power to show me what to do. Maybe if you ask the higher power, you'll get a completely different method. So I didn't need to figure out how to find God. I just said to God, I have no idea who you are or what you are, or no idea about anything. You're going to have to show me because I don't have the skill to do this. And God came through rather remarkably. Anthony de Mello talks about the solution to loneliness being contact with reality. And just before this meeting, I went and sat on the veranda there and looked at the way the light was reflecting off the water, and there were birds and there was other neat stuff. Well, that's enough. And to learn to actually be present to what is physically going on around me. And here's the paradox. I get in touch with a higher reality by being genuinely present to what is physically there. It's all backwards. It's the opposite of what you'd think, in a sense. And I find I can contact the higher power through all sorts of things, through art, through music. If I'm looking for the higher power in it, I'll find it. And the last thing, and I'll finish on this, is in terms of how do you stay away from the first think. answer the phone, respond to the text. When incoming communications happen, they're happening for a reason. Ask God how to respond and respond. I try and turn communications around as soon as possible. I don't let things build up. You pray to God and you want something spectacular to happen in your life, and someone just as sick as you calls you. That's the answer. And I think that's the whole answer of AA. If AA were burnt to a crisp and there was just one idea left, and that was the idea, be there for other people who are as unhappy as you, and you'll both be delivered, we wouldn't need anything else. AA could be reconstructed from the DNA of that simple idea. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening.